Dun 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 dun! The most famous four notes in all of classical music. It has to be said, right? You've all heard it before. You might not have known what it was. Maybe now you do. This is Beethoven's Fifth Symphony. Now, we've got to talk about Beethoven, okay? Beethoven is kind of a crossover composer, to be honest. He straddles the line between the symmetry and balance and reason and logic that you find in the classical era, right? But he also kind of borders into the romantic era where he starts thinking about the bigger picture, thinking about freedom and democracy and really looking at kind of universal brotherhood, right? And so we kind of see the hintings of that in this Fifth Symphony. So Beethoven, he's the end point of the classical era, right? Especially the Viennese school of composers. We look at Haydn, he's the guy who kind of invented the string quartet, the symphony, this multi-movement cycle that we've talked about. The first movement, sonata allegro form. The second movement, theme and variations, often slow, in a different key, right? The minuet and trio, the dance movement, right? And then the final movement, the finale, a rondo, right? Haydn perfected that, right? And he worked in the patronage system. He had a sugar daddy who took care of him, right? Then Mozart comes along, and Mozart tries to break out of that patronage system a little bit, right? The last 10 years of his life, he's a freelancer. He's just working in Vienna, kind of trying to get paid by all the rich people in town, right? He loved the scene, he loved all that. And then musically, he expanded all of those forms, all of those things that Haydn had invented and perfected. Mozart starts stretching them out, making them bigger, right? Beethoven comes along and says, you know what, guys? Screw you. I like what you're doing, but we got to start changing things up. He was a revolutionary, rebellious composer, right? When we look at this Fifth Symphony, he uses the classical form. First movement is classic sonata allegro, right? Exposition, development, recap, right? Then the second movement is a perfect theme and variations. Then you have the scherzo, which is like a dance movement, and then you have the finale. But the thing that's interesting about this entire symphony is that those four notes that I so poorly sang to you at the beginning, the short, 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 long, right? They tie the entire symphony together. It's why we call it a cyclic symphony. It's tied together as in a cycle. It goes in a circle, right? And what's great about this piece, too, is that you hear that short, 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 long motive in every single movement. You hear it obviously in the first movement, but then listen to the second movement. Bum, 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 ba-dum, bum, bum, right? So you've got that melody. Then in the third movement, obvious again, you hear it, and then you kind of glide into the fourth movement. And the fourth movement overlaps with the third movement, right? The third movement just runs directly into it. And what's so amazing about that transition is you're in this sad, kind of dark, ugly, angry C minor, sad sounding music. And then it just swells and grows into this triumphant, victorious C major, happy. The world has come around. Life might suck, but if you give it time and just wait, things will turn around again. And that's what Beethoven is kind of doing in this piece. Plus, then he gives you just a little taste of that third movement once again before going back into that triumphant theme at the end. It's a great piece, and what's more amazing than anything else is Beethoven wrote every single note of this stone cold deaf. Couldn't hear a note. Think about that. How would you live your life as a musician deaf? It's one of the reasons why Beethoven was such kind of a misanthrope. That's a fancy word for somebody who doesn't like people. He loved people. In fact, he craved attention. He needed to be around people. But he never wanted to reveal to them his secret that he was deaf. Here he is, a famous composer, more famous than anyone else. Famous composer that he says clearly, you know, this is the one sense, right? Sight, vision, whatever. hearing. This is the one sense that should be more perfect in me than anyone else, and it's gone. So he would avoid people. They'd try to say, "Hello, Herr Beethoven," while he walked through the market, and he couldn't hear them, and he'd just barrel on past. So they thought he was a jackass, to be blunt. That's maybe the nicest word I can think of right now. So people didn't really like him. They thought he was kind of a jerk. And it hurt him. It hurt him terribly. But at the end of his life, he wrote the Ninth Symphony, the most kind of unifying piece that's ever been written, the single most famous piece of all time. Da 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 dum ba-dum. The Ode to Joy theme. He writes this symphony, and the entire city shows up, and he's in tears, as is the entire audience at the performance. Right? It's his triumph. And when he dies, over 100,000 people show up to his funeral. That's how beloved Beethoven was. His Ode to Joy, that Ninth Symphony, gets performed thousands of times every year. I'm sure it will get performed many more in 2020, which is the 250th anniversary of his birth.